Imagine, if you will, that we've been talking about the genes and that we're all programmed and wired into groups, right? Cities, suburbs, communities, communes, whatever, okay? Schools, we all go when we live at the school, right? Who made up that rule? Well, probably the guy who gets paid at the school to do that, but I mean, you know, we cluster together, okay? So the reason that you cluster together is why? Because you are protected. Who are you protected from? You're protected from the enemy. Who's the enemy? Somebody who's not like us, okay? You and I will do anything to overcome the enemy. Now, who is the enemy of your customer, okay? Who is the enemy of your customer? Now think about that for a second. We already talked about how maybe the tax man could be the enemy, or the people who rammed the planes into the building on 9/11. Those are enemies, okay? Now, when you have people agreeing on who the enemy is, perhaps it's the competitor. Maybe you're trying to get your team going at Coca-Cola, and you don't like Pepsi, obviously, because they're taking your market share, so you literally have to make them the enemy. If you've ever watched a football team or a baseball game, it's often uncomfortable to even be in a stadium that's not your home stadium. I went to Wrigley Field last year, saw the Cubs play the White Sox, which was kind of cool. Chicago playing Chicago. Had never seen that, never got back to Wrigley since they started interleague play, and this is very fun for me. But we're watching it on the first base side, which is where the White Sox fans are all given their tickets for. I had forgotten about that. It had been a long time since I've been to a baseball game. So here we are, we're sitting in Wrigley Field in the stands watching the Cubs-White Sox, big rivalry, and I'm sitting with the White Sox fans. This turns out to be a substantial mistake, of course. Now think about this for just a moment. What I'm doing here is I'm sitting in a group of 800, 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 people, and we're the only people that are going, you know, hit the home run and all that kind of stuff. Now, imagine how you might feel when you're that person, and imagine how people do look at you when your guy gets a hit. It's almost like it's your fault that something happened. Pretty interesting? Okay, so people don't need to think about who the enemy is going to be. They feel it, they sense it, and just by having a different team, you have an enemy. Where this pays off in marketing and selling is that every group pretty much has an enemy, okay? And usually the enemies are insidious, but not always. It can be just as simple as the Cubs and the White Sox, but sometimes it can be much more than that. Smoking cigarettes can be a huge enemy, okay? And there's a lot of other things too. So how are you combining your efforts with this person that you're persuading, you're selling, in fighting the enemy? That's a huge thing that's going to draw people together.